מחסה בעוז, עזרה וצרות, נמצא מאוד אלוהים לנו מחסה בעוז, עזרה וצרות.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's Rebecca Levis, and I'm coming to you from San Diego, and we're going to study the Torah together. Today, we're in a parashah in the book of Exodus. The parashah is called Mishpatim, and it means judgments. So there's a lot of important things that I want to share with you in just 30 minutes. So let's get started. So let's review where we are in the story of the redemption of Israel. So Moses has brought them out of Egypt. The plagues are over, and they're out at Mount Sinai. This day is called Israel's wedding day. It's the day that God is going to make a covenant with this special people that he chose, like a groom would choose a bride. So the bride, Israel, is standing at the foot of the mountain, and God is going to give her ketubah, or the wedding promises, and we know them as the 10 Commandments. I like to call them empowerments because they're things that the groom is promising that if this will happen in the covenant, that they'll have a peaceful home, a secure home, and a home that's full of God's peace. So here's the picture. She's standing at the mountain, and God speaks to Moses and says, tell the people that I'm coming for her in 3 days. Tell them to wash their clothes and to get ready. Well, when it came time, the mountain was on fire at the top, and there was a loud sound. And the people, instead of drawing near, they were afraid and they backed away. So it's almost like the bride says yes and then didn't show up for the wedding. So it talks about the top of the mountain being like sapphire. And I thought, oh, that's like the wedding ring, this precious stone. Sapphire comes from the word sepher, which means seraphim, or to burn. So it's burning on top of the mountain. This is a picture of the groom, passionate for his bride. And he sets a boundary line, and he says, don't step on that boundary line. Why? He said, don't even touch it, because he was making a distinction between the bride and what's just normal or profane or unholy. And he's saying this is a sanctified, holy moment. So don't disturb what's about to happen here. So sadly, the bride backed away. So she withdrew out of fear. The Israelites said, no, Moses, you go up. This is sort of like, I say, religion, where people need a priest or a rabbi or somebody to intercede for them in between God and man. And to me, this is like them saying, oh no, Moses, we don't want a personal relationship with him. You go and speak to him for us. So after witnessing all that he had done, what might be hindering the bride or Israel? Well, it's the same thing that hinder people in coming close intimacy with God in religion. They look at religion as just, oh, it's just a bunch of rules instead of this romance. So maybe she's thinking, oh, I can't do this. It's going to cost me too much. You don't know my past. I have so much sin and guilt. Why would God ever accept me? That's one of the reasons. Or she could say, well, I'm not comfortable getting close to anybody. I've never been close. I've kind of been a loner. I do my own thing. Or maybe it's been fear of serving somebody else. I like to serve myself. I want to be in control. This is something that God wants to give her. He wants to give her that kind of confidence and courage and commands that will make their relationship beautiful. I like to say that the 10 Commandments are God's rules for man's tools to provide order, security, and peace. This is what I want to go on in my house. So God's commands come with responsibilities, like in any relationship, but also restrictions, the do's and the don'ts. The 10 Commandments were God's expectations, but also laws that were meant to redeem her as a set apart or specially chosen by God. She was the one that he wanted to pay the bride price for. Ultimately, this is a picture of the New Testament when the Messiah would come and give his life and pay the bride price with his very own life. So it's not with gold, but it is with blood. Remember, he said that gold and silver isn't the price. He says it's a life for a life. So she needed to be willing to commit to and connect to the groom in order to have this kind of covenant relationship. Remember that first principle that we learned way back in the garden, where we said two opposites come together, work as one to create something new, and that's new life. And this is what God is showing us here in this picture. God and man work together and bring about new spiritual life. Jesus said, you must be born again. The Spirit entering us and giving us new life. This is such a beautiful picture. So, what would motivate a bride to keep her promises? Well, it shouldn't be guilt or obligation, like a lot of dead religion is. I do it because I should, or I'm obligated, or I feel so guilty, I'm going to go and I'm going to confess and kneel and throw incense and spice. I say that's not true relationship. It's not true intimacy. She should want to draw near out of love and loyalty. And this is the same thing with saving faith versus just being religious. So in a covenant, there's a great exchange that happens that produces great outcomes. This is manifested when you have the physical consummation of the man and the woman. The man deposits seed into her and there's new life, just like God deposits his spirit into us and there's new life. Same command that was in the garden: be fruitful, multiply, and fill the whole earth with more life. So Israel was to be the light to the nations, demonstrating God's love and his heart to those around her. Now, Moses gave all the words, then he set up 12 pillars at the base of the mountain, and he read all of the words to everyone. Then he had the young men, the next generation, come kill an ox and put half the blood as the offering on these altars, 12 altars, 12 tribes. And then this would be the blood of the covenant, foreshadowing what the Messiah would do. So Adonai has made with you in accordance with all these words. So he's sealing them with the words, just like we're sealed with the Spirit. Jesus is called the Word of God. Look at these parallels. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to everyone. And once again, the bride said, okay, we agreed to it. But she didn't want to go up with him. So Moses went up with Aaron, the two sons of Aaron, and the 70 elders to the top of the mountain. They said it was clear as sapphire. They all ate a meal together, which is a sign of covenant commitment. And this is also foreshadowing and mirroring what Jesus would do with the 12 tribes when he was about to shed his blood on Passover. And they had a meal, didn't they? Okay, so Adonai called Moses up alone into the cloud to receive these two tablets written in stone. And a lot of the rabbis believe this was sapphire stone that they were originally written in. And he remained there 6 days. And on the seventh day, he called him into the cloud so that they couldn't see him anymore. And he was there for 40 days and 40 nights. And he left Aaron and the two sons, her and the 70 elders, to rule over and make judgments for the people. So I want to talk about these judgments. But before I do, let me show you this word that's so beautiful. Israel is like a bride that softens herself, prepares herself for her wedding. She anoints herself, her hair, her skin with scented oils to make her pleasing and soften her skin when she goes in to consummate the wedding. Well, the word for oil is shemen, and it means to nourish, be healthy, or abundance. The word shemen is also the root word for number 8, shemone. See the word shemen in it? That number 8 is the word that means to begin again. So it's not a coincidence that this anointing is on a bride who's about to start her life again, now as a bride, no longer a single woman. Now, examples of this number 8 being the number of starting over. There was 8 people in the ark when God started over again after the flood. On the 8th day, to circumcise the male children. That means I'm going to be a covenant child now, not just a regular child, but I'm coming into covenant. And then, like I said in the past, the 7 notes on a scale, and then the 8th note starts the scale over. Same thing with the 7 colors of the rainbow. So these are the judgments or rulings that God is going to give. Now, this has 50 some rulings by God. And some of them, when you read through them, you just think, what the heck is going on here? These seem so confusing. But when you really look at them closely, you'll see that God had an original plan that was fair and just, and always had the best interests of the people in his mind. And there's a couple I really want to focus on today. One is on women, and the other is on servants, or sometimes translated as slaves. Now, these were called righteous rulings originally. And this judge would vindicate, find the truth, and then give a verdict. So it's a vindicate and then a verdict. He would give consequences or compensation based on which party was right or wrong. This judicial system kept the peace in the camp, and they could live in harmony and in community. They were to be accountable to one another in fairness and justice. This is what they call my brother's keeper. Remember when I think it was Cain that was asked, where's your brother? And he said, am I my brother's keeper? Well, he was supposed to be his brother's keeper. That was the whole purpose of these laws and rules. So they were established to render decisions that were right or righteous. And that's the same word as justice. Tzaddik can be translated here, right or righteous or just. So what is right and just? So they were case-by-case laws. And we see Rabbi Shaul said, I have this mind. And it's a transformed mind based on law and justice. So he wants us to have this kind of a mind that was in Jesus, Yeshua HaMashiach, that he cared about justice and he cared about righteousness. The rabbis believe that when you're balancing who's right or wrong, if it seems even, you're to always balance on the side of mercy. And that is the weightier matters. That's the word kavod, for glory or honor. So the honor is always given mercifully. In other words, he holds back what somebody's due and he shows them mercy and grace. And I love that. It's related to the word for compassion. Sometimes these words are translated, hesed is sometimes translated here as compassion, but there's a separate word for that, and it means a womb or motherly protection. I love that. So they functioned as judges as well as the prophets functioned as judges in ancient time. Now, when the temple was destroyed, 120 men called the Great Assembly gave rulings over matters of conflict between the Israelites. And this is what happened when the temple was destroyed. And these judges or prophets, examples of them called Shoftim, judges, were Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, and Zechariah, just to name a few. And they dealt with all kinds of law, moral, ethical, civil, and religious laws. So they ruled rightly, not like the pagans around them that ruled ruthlessly in an unjust system. A godly leader would rule all matters fairly. And this group of men today are called a dion. A dion comes from the word danan, which means to reside or bring to rest. So when you're treated fairly, your heart can be at rest, right? So 2 words related to this, see the dalet and the noon? Well, there's a dalet and a noon in the word for the garden, Eden, where God satisfied their needs and they were delighted and their hearts were at rest. And then also the word Adon, you see the dalet and the noon here, which is another form of noon, and it means to sustain or to lead, be the master. So you can see that it's important words, Dan, to judge. And God is the ultimate judge, isn't he? So what were the reasons for servants? Well, if you had a crime, it could be restitution. You'd have to do maybe community service. or you would work to pay off a debt. This is your indentured servant. Or maybe you just had compassion for the poor or the needy, a woman or child without a husband to care for her. So you would take them into your home. And there were time limits and distinctions, healthy boundaries placed on the servant, slave sometimes translated, but not like the slaves in the South. This was a godly way to have servants, where there was boundaries and respect, and you treated them fairly. So the actions of the one in authority spoke of redemption, compassion, and brotherly love. This was the initial plan. And then it went south and went wrong. And we know all the stories in the Bible where people didn't treat those in their household correctly. So any servant was treated with respect and appreciation. And someone with a slave mentality is hopefully transformed into one with a servant heart. In other words, the family that took them in was to model good behavior. And so this person would then be called a bondservant, and they would serve for a period of years, and then they could be free to go if they wanted. But if they wanted to stay, they would actually pierce their ears. They'd put an awl through their ear and put an earring in, and that meant you were a bondservant or a slave to this person you were to serve. Isn't it interesting, the one earring and who you're going to serve today, right? One earring. What is symbolic of that? Somebody you're serving. Now, they could voluntarily join themselves, and then they'd have equal status as the family. Here's what the master was obligated to the servant. They were never to let him starve. They weren't to be beggars, just give them a handout and then kick them out. True faith is this: one beggar telling someone else where to find bread that will sustain them. So the idea was to bring people into your home to set an example, not to use them and abuse them. So God considered it better to buy or redeem and restore a person who is down on his luck. Put him to work for the 6 years, teach him a trade, model good behavior, and then put him back in society so that he could be a contributing member of society. This is called biblical restoration. So he provided a way for them to be free. In the 7th year, they called it the year of joy, the Shemitah year. And we're going to go into that more in the future, so I'm not going to go into it here. Now, in ancient cultures, women and children couldn't support themselves without husbands because they couldn't own land. And so that was rare for women to own land, but there were exceptions. But anyway, it was the father's responsibility then to broker a marriage for his daughters. And they were trying to find somewhere where she could be supported for the rest of her life so that she would have dignity and value. But if a poor man had a daughter and he couldn't pay the bride price or broker a marriage for her, he could bring her to a rich man and she'd be brought into his house as a servant called an alma. And it was a maid servant or a handmaiden. And that word comes from the word alam, which means to hide away or be undeveloped. And so this would be a young woman who was preparing to be married to either the person who brought her in or to their son or to someone in their household. So this is how she became a dependent in that household. And then he would write a ketubah or a dowry and pay the price. And she would be given to somebody that he loved or trusted. And that is so much like the Father giving us to the groom, the Messiah, right? So even though God is compassionate, he can't tolerate rebellion. And he knew that Israel would be rebellious if sin was allowed to be in the camp. And we're going to see this all through the next books of the Bible. But examples of sin starting small and then ending in something tragic, we have the examples of Cain and Ishmael, Reuben, Ham, even King David was guilty of adultery and murder. And we'll read about those stories later. Minor sin, if left unchecked and without consequences, even as children in our home, it would grow into what I call a little monster, a little sinning monster. So if you dishonor the authority of your parents, you're also going to dishonor God's authority over you. And so Dishonoring God, the first authority over you, was the first seed planted in the heart of a child, and it would eventually grow and dishonor all authority. Now, remember what a little leaven does in the whole batch? It takes control, just like an unruly child. And you've seen me draw this before. Covenant love is always balanced with love and discipline. And then I show you the 4 quadrants of maximum love, maximum discipline. This is where the secure child learns about consequences, responsibilities, and what's right and wrong. If there's too much discipline and no love, you get a rebellious child. Too much love and no discipline, a spoiled child. And then no love, no discipline. This is the kids you find out on the street, and this is your delinquent. So tough love is an eye for an eye, and all that means in biblical talk is that the consequence has to, or compensation has to be equal or fit the crime. It doesn't literally mean if you get your eye poked out, you get to poke someone else's eye out. So it just means that you're to make it right. Okay, true justice makes things right again. So that's what an eye for an eye means. Now, there's more slides after this, but I don't want to go into it now because it would take me way too long. But for those of you who get my slides and my PowerPoints, you can then look at these slides. There's more in there, but I don't have time to put it all in right now. So it's Valentine's Day today. You see, I'm wearing my earrings with the hearts. So may God give you a heart of flesh instead of a heart of stone. And may you be tender and soft towards him ruling over you in his love. Shabbat Shalom, and I'll see you next time on Sparky's Torah Time. Bye-bye.